The rain hit the loading bay in sheets, hammering against corrugated steel, while Aura Bellamy pushed her delivery cart toward the exit, her shift finally over. She was tired. Her back ached from 12 hours of hauling server crates, and all she wanted was to go home and eat something warm. She didn't get the chance. A black SUV rolled into the bay with its headlights off, blocking her path before she even reached the gate. The door opened. A man stepped out, tall, sharp-suited, moving like every second of his life had been calculated in advance. She recognized him instantly. Everyone in the city did. Kalen Vance. The man who ran half the underground data trade in the metro, wrapped in the polished skin of a legitimate tech empire. People didn't cross Kalen Vance. People who tried usually vanished quietly. "Aura Bellamy," he said, reading her name off a tablet without looking up. "Route 14, night shift, badge number 2291. You picked up a server chassis from Base 6 at 11:04 p.m. 3 nights ago." "That's my job," she said, keeping her cart between them like it could protect her. "I move boxes, I don't open them." "This box," Kalen said, turning the tablet toward her, "had a master encryption key inside it, worth more than this entire terminal. It disappeared somewhere between your pickup and the drop-off point, and the manifest logs," he tapped the screen, "say you're the only one who touched it." Aura's stomach dropped, but she didn't let it show on her face. She'd learned a long time ago that fear was something people used against you the moment they saw it. "Show me," she said. He turned the tablet fully toward her. Timestamps, GPS pings, her badge scan at Base 6, her badge scan at the drop node, and in between, a gap. A 12-minute gap where the system had no record of her location at all. "Convenient gap, isn't it?" Kalen said quietly. 12 minutes is exactly enough time to swap a drive. Or exactly enough time for someone to fake this log, Aura shot back. That earned her a flicker of something in his eyes, not anger. Curiosity. Nobody talked to Kalen Vance like that, not twice. "You have 30 seconds to give me a real answer," he said, "before I stop being polite about this." Aura's hands were already moving. She didn't waste her 30 seconds arguing. She crouched by her cart, popped the side panel of her handheld diagnostic scanner, the same battered unit she used every night to check container integrity before loading, and pulled up the log she'd saved from that exact shipment. "You want a real answer? Here it is." She turned the scanner toward him. "This is the thermal seal reading on that chassis. Every server box has one. It logs temperature and pressure the second the casing is opened, so nobody swaps parts mid-transit without it showing." Kalen's jaw tightened as he leaned in, scanning the numbers. "The seal broke at 8:47 p.m., Aura said. "I didn't clock in until 10:50. I didn't touch that box until 11:04. Whatever happened inside that chassis happened 2 hours before it was ever in my hands." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Rain drummed on the metal roof above them, filling the silence. "That's not possible," Kalen said slowly. "The manifest says the seal was intact at pickup." "Then the manifest is lying," Aura said. "Or somebody rewrote it after the fact to make it look that way." Kalen took the scanner from her hands carefully, like it was suddenly the most valuable thing in the room, and studied the raw data himself, cross-referencing it against the tablet log. His expression shifted from suspicion to something colder, harder, not directed at her anymore. "Somebody set this up," he murmured, almost to himself. "Somebody wanted it to land on you." "I told you that 30 seconds ago," Aura said. He looked up at her then, really looked, like he was seeing her for the first time, not as a name on a manifest, not as a convenient scapegoat, but as someone who had just handed him proof that could unravel his entire organization from the inside. "Who else had access to that chassis before it reached the loading bay?" he asked. "I don't know. I'm delivery staff, not security." Aura crossed her arms. "But if that seal broke at 8:47, somebody with clearance to the internal server room did it. Somebody who knew exactly which shipment to hit and exactly how to make the timeline point at me afterward." Kalen's grip on the tablet tightened until his knuckles went pale. "Do you have any idea what was in that drive?" he asked quietly. "No," And honestly, right now, I don't want to. Too late for that. He handed her scanner back, his voice low and edged with something that sounded almost like respect. You just proved my organization has a leak deep enough to frame an innocent employee for a theft worth 9 figures. That makes you a witness, and it makes you a target. Aura felt the cold settle into her chest, heavier than the rain soaking through her jacket. A target for who? Kalen didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced over his shoulder, out toward the terminal gate, where for just a second, a shadow moved between 2 parked freight trucks, and then was gone. Get in the car, he said. Now. I'm not getting in a car with Aura. His voice cracked like a whip, sharper than anything he'd said all night. Whoever framed you just realized you can prove it wasn't you, which means in the next 5 minutes, they're going to make sure you can never say it out loud. Aura didn't move fast enough. The shadow between the freight trucks had already multiplied. 3, then 4 shapes fanning out along the terminal fence, dressed in black with faces covered. Car, now! Kalen grabbed her cart-free hand and pulled her toward the SUV. She yanked back. My bag! Leave it! They were 3 steps from the vehicle when the first shot cracked against the SUV's window, spiderwebbing the glass an inch from Kalen's driver. The man behind the wheel didn't wait for instructions. He threw the car into reverse and peeled away from the curb, leaving Kalen and Aura stranded in the open bay with nothing but a loading dock between them and 4 armed men. Guess we're not doing that, Kalen muttered, grabbing her by the wrist and hauling her toward the terminal's side exit, a narrow gap between 2 dumpsters that led out into the maze of alleys behind the metro hub. You said walk me through the pickup timeline, Aura said, half shouting over the wind, not run for my life through a war zone. Plans change. He glanced back. 2 of the masked figures had already cleared the fence. You know this area? I deliver here 5 nights a week. I know every inch of it. Then start proving it. They cut left, down a service alley so narrow, Kalen's shoulders nearly scraped both walls. Aura moved with the kind of certainty that only came from months of hauling packages through these exact paths in the dark, rain, and fog. She knew which drainage grates were loose enough to trip an unfamiliar foot. She knew which walls had cameras and which ones didn't. Next right, she said. It dead ends unless you know about the loading gap behind the noodle shop. And you know about it. I deliver their supply crates every Tuesday. They ducked through a gap in a chain-link fence just as footsteps pounded into the alley behind them. A flashlight beam swept the walls, missing them by inches as Aura pulled Kalen down behind a stack of pallets. They're not slowing down, Kalen whispered. These aren't rent-a-guards. This is a real extraction team. Extraction for what? For you. His eyes were sharp, even in the dark. If they wanted me gone, they'd have opened fire the second we stepped outside. They're herding us, which means somebody wants you alive, at least until they get whatever's in your head. Aura's blood went cold. I don't have anything in my head. I told you I don't know what was on that drive. They don't know that. The flashlight beam swept past their hiding spot again, closer this time. Aura grabbed Kalen's sleeve and pointed toward a fire escape ladder bolted to the side of an old textile warehouse. That ladder drops into the flower market loading zone. 3 turns from there and we're on Wexler Street. It's public, cameras everywhere. They won't touch us in the open. You've thought about this before. I think about escape routes every night I walk home alone past midnight, Aura said flatly. Comes with the job. They moved. The ladder rattled under their combined weight, and halfway down, one of the masked men spotted them from the alley mouth and shouted something in a language Aura didn't recognize. 2 more shapes peeled off to cut them from the flower market side. They're boxing us in, Kalen said, dropping the last few feet and pulling Aura down after him. Change of plan. Wexler Street's covered. Aura's mind raced through the map of the district she'd built, delivery route by delivery route, night after night for 3 years. There had to be something. A blind spot. A path nobody without her job would ever think to use. The maintenance tunnel, she said suddenly, under the flower market. Delivery crews use it to move refrigerated stock without crossing the main floor. It connects to the parking garage 2 blocks over. Is it locked? Only if you don't know the delivery code. She was already moving toward a rusted service door, half hidden behind stacked crates of wilting flowers. Her fingers punched a 6-digit code into a keypad worn smooth by years of gloved hands. The lock clicked open. They slipped inside just as the beam of a flashlight swept across the door they'd vanished through. Aura pulled it shut behind them, plunging the narrow concrete tunnel into near-total darkness, lit only by the dim emergency strip lighting along the floor. "This buys us maybe 2 minutes," she whispered, breathing hard. "They'll figure out where we went." 2 minutes is enough. Kalen was already moving down the tunnel, faster now, like a man recalculating every assumption he'd walked in with. "You just navigated us through a professional extraction team using nothing but a job most people look down on." "Most people," Aura said, jogging to keep pace, "have never actually needed to know a city like I do." They emerged into the parking garage exactly where she'd promised, and Kalen didn't waste a second pulling out a second phone, a burner, clearly meant for exactly this kind of emergency, and calling for a different car, one whose route no one could have anticipated. As they waited in the shadows of a concrete pillar, Kalen studied her with an expression that had shifted completely from the cold suspicion of an hour ago. "Whoever framed you," he said quietly, "didn't count on you being smarter than the trap." "Or maybe," Aura said, still catching her breath, "they didn't count on you actually listening instead of pulling the trigger first." Kalen didn't answer that, but something in his face, a flicker of surprise, maybe even respect, told her the thought had landed harder than he wanted to admit. The second car pulled up. He opened the door for her without a word. This time, Aura got in. The sun was already climbing over the rooftops by the time the car pulled up outside Aura's building, a squat brick walk-up wedged between a laundromat and a shuttered pharmacy. She hadn't slept. Neither, apparently, had Kalen. His tie was gone, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, and there was a tightness in his jaw that hadn't relaxed since the tunnel. "This is a bad idea," Aura said, unlocking her door with hands that were still faintly shaking. "Bringing a Mafia boss to my apartment." "I'm not walking away until I understand what happened to that drive," Kalen said, stepping past her into the cramped living room. "And right now, your apartment is safer than anywhere I control. Nobody expects me here." Her apartment wasn't much, a fold-out couch, a kitchenette barely big enough to turn around in, but one corner of the room told a different story entirely. A wall of shelving held 3 refurbished server towers, a tangle of cables, 2 monitors salvaged from a recycling center, and a soldering station neat enough to belong in a professional lab. Kalen stopped in front of it, genuinely startled. "You built this?" "Piece by piece. Most of it's scrap other companies threw out." Aura moved past him and dropped into the chair at her desk, waking one of the monitors with a tap. "I don't just push boxes for a living, Mr. Vance. I fix what's inside them too, when I get the chance." "Kalen," he said, "if we're doing this together, drop the Mr. Vance." She didn't answer that, focusing instead on pulling the raw scanner logs from her handheld unit and feeding them into her desktop. Lines of code scrolled past, dense and unreadable to anyone without training, but Aura's eyes moved through it like she was reading a familiar language. "The thermal seal data proves when the breach happened," she muttered, half to herself, "but it doesn't tell us who did it. For that, I need to see if whoever cracked that chassis left anything behind in the breach code itself." "People don't usually leave fingerprints on a 9-figure theft," Kalen said, pulling a stool over and sitting close enough to watch the screen. "They don't leave fingerprints, they leave signatures." Aura pulled up a hex viewer, scrolling through raw firmware data extracted from the breach point. "Every custom security tool has a coding style. It's like handwriting. If you know what to look for, you can usually tell who built it, even if they tried to hide it." For nearly 20 minutes, neither of them spoke. Kalen watched Aura work with a kind of quiet fascination, the way her fingers moved across the keyboard without hesitation, the way she muttered half-formed theories under her breath and then discarded them, chasing something just out of reach. It reminded him, uncomfortably, of watching his father work numbers decades ago, back when Vance Corporate had still felt like something worth being proud of. Then Aura went still. "There," she said quietly. "What?" She zoomed into a fragment of code buried deep in the breach sequence, a short string of characters embedded where it had no functional reason to exist. A signature, deliberately hidden but not quite hidden enough. "This isn't standard breach architecture," she said. "This is custom diagnostic firmware. Somebody built a tool specifically to crack that thermal seal without triggering an alarm, and then embedded a verification tag inside it, probably so they could confirm later that their own tool had worked." "Can you trace it?" "I don't need to trace it." Aura's voice had gone very quiet. "I recognize it." Kalen leaned in. "From where?" 2 years ago, before I was doing deliveries full-time, I did contract diagnostic work for smaller firms. One of the jobs put me on a security audit team reviewing legacy Vance corporate infrastructure. She pointed at the string on the screen. "This exact firmware style, the compression method, the way the verification tag is structured, I've seen it before. It's a signature only one engineer at your company uses. He was infamous for it, said it was faster than standard obfuscation and nobody would ever bother decoding it anyway." "Who?" Aura turned to face him fully, and for the first time since the loading bay, there was something steady and certain in her expression instead of fear. "Vane," she said. "Reese Vane, your head of internal security." The silence that followed lasted long enough that Aura could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchenette behind them. "That's not possible," Kalen said finally, but there was no real conviction in it. Vane built half the security architecture protecting that drive in the first place. "Which is exactly why nobody would think to suspect him," Aura said. "He didn't need to break in from outside. He already had the keys. All he needed was a scapegoat far enough removed from the company that nobody would ask the right questions, someone whose word wouldn't carry weight against a signed manifest." Kalen sat back, rubbing a hand across his jaw, processing the shape of a betrayal that reached far deeper than a stolen drive. "Vane's been with my family for 11 years, he said quietly. "He was at my father's funeral. He helped me consolidate control of the company after." "People don't need a reason to betray you," Aura said. "They just need an opportunity and enough time to convince themselves it's justified." Kalen looked at the screen again, at the small, buried signature that was quietly unraveling everything he thought he understood about the people closest to him. "If I take this to the board," he said slowly, "Vane will see it coming before I even finish the sentence. He'll bury it, or worse, he'll bury you." "Then don't take it to the board yet." Aura closed the laptop halfway, meeting his eyes. "Find out what he's planning to do with that key first. Because a man who frames an innocent delivery girl to steal something this valuable isn't doing it just to prove a point." Kalen's expression hardened into something colder and far more dangerous than the suspicion he'd walked in with the night before. "No," he said. "He's doing it to sell it. And if he's already found a buyer, we don't have much time left to stop him." The executive floor of Vance Corporate Tower smelled like money and fear in equal measure. Polished marble, cold air conditioning, and the particular silence that settled over a room full of people trying to decide who to blame before the blame found them first. Kalen walked in 11 minutes late, which for him was practically a declaration of war. Every head at the long glass table turned as he took his seat at the head of it, jacket buttoned, expression unreadable. Nobody could have guessed that 4 hours earlier he'd been hiding in a delivery girl's apartment, staring at proof that the man sitting 3 seats down from him had orchestrated the biggest security breach in company history. "Nice of you to join us," said Sorella Vance, his aunt and the closest thing the syndicate had to a chairwoman. She sat across from him, hands folded, her expression carved from the same cold marble as the table between them. "We've been discussing your failure for the better part of an hour." "My failure," Kalen repeated evenly. "The master key walked out of your building under your security protocols," Sorella said. "That's not a technicality, Kalen. That's a hole in the foundation of everything this family has built. The board wants answers. I want answers." Around the table, 6 senior executives sat with carefully neutral faces, none of them willing to be the first to speak against him outright, except one. Rhys Vane leaned forward, steepling his fingers with the practiced calm of a man who had spent 11 years learning exactly how to sound reasonable while pushing a knife deeper. "With respect, Sorella," Vane said, "I think we're dancing around the real issue. Kalen personally interfered with the internal investigation last night. Terminal security logged him removing a suspect from custody before she could be properly questioned." Kalen's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. The suspect had exculpatory evidence the investigation team hadn't reviewed. "Evidence you decided to evaluate personally," Vane said, "instead of handing it to the security division, whose entire job is exactly that." "Because the security division is run by you," Kalen said, and let the words sit there, watching carefully for a reaction. Vane's expression didn't so much as flicker. 11 years of practice had made him very good at that. "I'll take that as an accusation of incompetence, at minimum." "Take it however you like." Sorella's hand came down flat against the glass table, sharp enough to cut through the tension. "Enough, both of you." She turned her attention fully to Kalen. "The board authorized a 4-day investigation window before this goes to the wider syndicate council. If that key isn't recovered and this breach isn't fully explained by then, I will personally move to strip you of executive authority and place emergency control of this company in Vane's hands. Do you understand what that means?" Kalen understood exactly what it meant. It meant everything his father had built, everything Kalen had spent the last 6 years trying to hold together, would pass into the hands of the man who had orchestrated its near collapse in the first place. "I understand," Kalen said. "Then start acting like it." Sorella's eyes didn't soften. "You have 4 days. I suggest you use them." The meeting dissolved into logistics after that. Security protocol reviews, damage control statements for the corporate side of the business, contingency plans in case the key's theft became public. Kalen said little, letting the conversation wash past him while he watched Vane across the table, searching for any crack in the composure. He found none. Whatever Vane was planning, he'd had years to prepare for exactly this moment. It was only as the room began to empty that Vane lingered by the door, waiting until the last executive had filed out before speaking. "You should have let the investigation team handle the girl," Vane said quietly. "Personal involvement makes you look weak in front of the board." Sorella noticed. I noticed. "Is that concern, Rhys, or a warning? Call it advice from someone who's watched you inherit a company you were never fully ready for." Vane's tone was almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. "Your father built this on discipline and distance. You're building it on instinct and sentiment. That's how families like ours end up in the ground." Kalen studied him, really studied him, the way you study something you're seeing clearly for the first time. 11 years of loyalty, or the appearance of it. A man who had stood at his father's funeral with his hand on Kalen's shoulder, murmuring that everything would be all right. "Funny," Kalen said, "you talking about discipline and distance. You've always struck me as a man who plays a very long game, Rhys. I just never stopped to wonder what you were actually playing for." Something shifted behind Vane's eyes, brief, almost imperceptible, gone before Kalen could be certain he'd seen it at all. 4 days, Vane said instead, straightening his jacket. "I hope for your sake that's enough." He left without waiting for a response. Kalen stood alone in the empty boardroom for a long moment, the weight of everything pressing down at once. The company, the deadline, the growing certainty that the man he'd trusted most in this building had been quietly working against him for longer than one stolen drive could explain. His phone buzzed, a message from Aura, sent from a new encrypted line he'd set up for her that morning. Found something. The firmware signature pinged a location 12 hours ago, not company servers, somewhere private. Come when you can, don't bring anyone. Kalen read it twice, then pocketed the phone and walked out of the boardroom without looking back at the empty chair where Vane had been sitting. 4 days. It wasn't much, but it was enough time to find out exactly what Rhys Vane thought he was playing for, and to make sure he never got the chance to collect it. The compound sat at the end of a private road, so overgrown it barely looked drivable, tucked into a curve of coastline where the cliffs dropped straight into grey water. Kalen had bought it years ago under a shell company nobody in the syndicate knew about, not even Sorella. A place that existed on no map tied to his name. "This is where you disappear to when you don't want to be found," Aura said, stepping out of the car and taking in the low glass and timber house perched above the waves. "This is where I come when I need to think clearly," Kalen said. "Right now, that's the same thing." Inside, the house was sparse but comfortable. Clean lines, a wall of windows facing the ocean, a kitchen that looked barely used. Aura set her equipment case on the long dining table and started unpacking without needing to be asked, the way she'd been doing every night since the loading bay. Diagnostic scanner, 2 laptops, a tangle of cables she sorted by feel more than sight. The signature pinged from a private server registered to a shell address in Zurich, she said, pulling up the trace she'd built earlier that day. Whoever's running it took real care to hide the ownership trail. Corporate lawyers, 3 layers of holding companies. That's not the kind of setup you build to hide a personal side project. That's the kind of setup you build to sell something to buyers who need deniability, Kalen said, sitting across from her. Buyers, plural. There's activity from at least 4 different regions pinging that same node in the last week. Aura frowned at the screen. Vane's not just stealing the key, he's auctioning it. They worked through the evening like that, Aura building a counterpatch that could trace the key's location the moment it moved again, Kalen cross-referencing shell company names against syndicate records he'd smuggled out on an encrypted drive. Somewhere around midnight, the work slowed into something quieter. Aura had stopped typing and was staring out at the dark water, the glow of the monitor the only light in the room. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "That has nothing to do with any of this." Kalen looked up. "Go ahead." "Why do you even want to keep the company? You could walk away from all of it. You clearly hate half the people in that boardroom." He was quiet for a moment, turning a pen over in his hands. "My father built Vance Corporate out of nothing. Before it was legitimate tech infrastructure, it was just him and 2 employees running server maintenance out of a garage. He turned it into something that mattered. When he was gone, everyone expected me to either run it into the ground or turn it into exactly the kind of soulless empire Vane thinks I'm too soft to build." He set the pen down. "I don't know which of those scares me more. But walking away isn't really a choice I get to make, not with the family this ties me to." Aura studied him, something in her expression softening. "That sounds lonely." "It is." He hadn't meant to say it that plainly, but something about the dark water outside and the exhaustion pulling at both of them made honesty easier than usual. "What about you? Why delivery routes if you can build servers from scrap and read breach code like it's a second language?" Aura almost laughed, but there was no bitterness in it. "Because talent doesn't pay medical bills as fast as showing up for a shift does. My mom's been sick for 3 years. Diagnostics jobs are inconsistent. Good months, bad months. Delivery work is steady. Boring, but steady." She traced a finger along the edge of her laptop. "But if I ever got the chance, real chance, not just scraping parts together in an apartment, I'd build something that actually mattered. Internet infrastructure for the neighborhoods everyone else forgets about. The places where someone can't do homework because there's no connection at home, where small businesses can't even take digital payments. I've seen what that gap does to people. I want to close it." Kalen watched her while she spoke, something shifting behind his eyes, not the calculating look he wore in boardrooms, but something quieter, more honest. "You'd be good at that," he said. "You don't know that. I've watched you outthink a professional extraction team, trace a hidden firmware signature nobody else caught, and build a counterpatch from a kitchen table in under 6 hours, Kalen said. "I know exactly what you'd be good at." Aura felt heat rise in her face and looked back at the screen, mostly to have somewhere else to look. "You're not exactly what I expected either, for what it's worth." "What did you expect?" "Someone colder. Someone who wouldn't have bothered checking my scanner logs in that loading bay. Most people in your position would have just believed the manifest and made the problem disappear." I almost did, Kaylin admitted quietly. The only reason I didn't is that you refused to be scared into silence. That's rare. People are usually very good at telling me what I want to hear. I'm not most people. No, Kaylin said. You're really not. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It stretched between them, warm despite the cold ocean air seeping through the windows, filled with something neither of them had expected to find in the middle of a conspiracy that could get them both finished. Aura closed her laptop halfway, finally letting herself feel the exhaustion of 2 sleepless nights. We should rest. We've got maybe 3 days left before Sorella hands your company to Vane on a plate. 3 days, Kaylin agreed, standing. Neither of them moved right away. Good night, Aura, he said finally, and there was something in the way he said her name, softer than she'd heard from him before, that told her the walls between them had shifted more than either of them was ready to admit out loud. By morning, Aura had a lead. She'd barely slept, hunched over her laptop at the kitchen table, with the ocean turning grey to gold outside the windows, but the exhaustion had melted away the moment the signal ping registered. It moved, she said, before Kaylin had even finished pouring coffee. The master key's location signature, it pinged twice overnight from a fixed node instead of the mobile shell server we traced before. Kaylin set the mug down and came around to look at the screen. Where? Harbor Freight Terminal 7, automated cargo hub, mostly unmanned overnight, a handful of maintenance staff and security drones running the floor. She zoomed into a schematic she'd pulled from public infrastructure records. If Vane's routing the key through a physical relay drive before it goes to auction, that's the kind of place you'd stage it. Minimal human eyes, easy to write off any irregular activity as routine automated traffic. You're saying he's using it as a dead drop? I'm saying it's the best chance we've had since this started to grab that drive before it leaves the country. Aura looked up at him. But it means going in physically. I can't trace a relay signal sitting on a couch. Kaylin didn't hesitate. Then we go tonight. The terminal at midnight was a strange kind of quiet. Not silence, but the mechanical hum of machines running without anyone watching them. Automated cranes shifted containers under floodlights, while conveyor systems clattered somewhere deep inside the warehouse structure. Kaylin and Aura moved along the perimeter fence in dark clothing, staying low, guided entirely by the map Aura had built from years of memorizing courier routes through facilities exactly like this one. Security drones patrol on a 6-minute loop, she whispered, checking the readout on her scanner. Ground guards are lighter than I expected. Looks like Vane's relying mostly on automation to keep this quiet. That's good for us. Automation follows rules. Rules can be exploited. You've done this before, Kaylin said, only half joking. I've delivered to 100 terminals like this one. You learn which systems actually watch you and which ones just think they do. She pointed toward a service door near the loading dock's east corner. That's a maintenance entry point. Courier crews use it to bypass the main scanning gate when moving priority freight. If I can get us onto the internal network through there, I can lock the automated security systems into a false maintenance cycle. Guards go blind, drones stand down, cameras loop old footage. How long can you hold that? 10 minutes, maybe 12 if we're lucky. Then let's not waste the lucky minutes. Aura's fingers moved fast over the maintenance panel beside the service door, her scanner feeding false credentials into the terminal's access system using a courier override code she'd learned years ago and never quite forgotten. The door clicked open. Inside, the warehouse floor stretched out in a maze of stacked containers and automated rail lines, dimly lit by security floodlights that cast long shadows across the concrete. Aura moved fast, pulling a small tablet from her bag and connecting it to a maintenance junction box bolted to a support pillar. Locking the security loop now, she murmured, fingers flying across the screen. Cameras are looping. Drones are grounded for maintenance diagnostics. We've got a clean window. They moved deeper into the warehouse, following the signal trace toward a smaller structure near the rear of the facility, a relay hub, sealed behind a reinforced door with a keypad lock far more sophisticated than the maintenance entrance. That's not standard courier security, Kaylin said, studying it. No, Aura agreed. That's Vane's handiwork. She pulled up the same diagnostic tool she'd used to trace the original breach and ran it against the keypad's firmware. For a tense 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then the lock clicked and the door swung open onto a small server room humming with cooling fans. Inside, mounted on a rack no bigger than a briefcase, sat a relay drive blinking with a steady green light, actively transmitting. "That's it," Aura breathed. "That's the relay Vane's using to route the master key data before it goes to the auction buyers." Kalen reached for it, but Aura grabbed his wrist. "Wait, if we pull it now, whoever's monitoring the transmission on the other end will know instantly. We need to copy the data first, then kill the connection cleanly, or Vane will have proof someone accessed this location tonight." "How long?" 90 seconds. It felt longer than that. Aura connected her portable drive to the relay's access port, watching a progress bar crawl across her tablet screen, while Kalen stood at the door, watching the warehouse floor for any sign the security loop was failing. A distant hum changed pitch. A drone, somewhere far off, adjusting its patrol pattern. "Aura. Almost there." The progress bar hit 90%, then 95%, and Kalen could hear the faint mechanical whir of a security drone rounding a container stack 2 rows over. "Now would be good," he said quietly. "Done." Aura yanked the drive free the instant the transfer completed, and Kalen pulled the server room door shut behind them, sealing the relay hub just as the drone's floodlights swept past the end of the row they'd been standing in seconds earlier. They didn't speak again until they were back outside the fence line, jogging toward the car parked 2 streets over, adrenaline finally starting to fade into exhaustion. "We got it," Aura said, breathless, holding up the small drive like a trophy. "Buyer transaction data, routing records, everything Vane's been funneling through that relay." Kalen took it from her hands, turning it over once before pocketing it carefully. "This is enough to end him." "It's enough to prove what he's done," Aura corrected. "Ending him is going to take more than data." Kalen looked at her in the dim glow of a street lamp, something fierce and grateful in his expression that he didn't bother hiding this time. "Then we make sure we have more," he said. "Whatever it takes." The marina apartment Kalen kept near the harbor was smaller than the coastal compound, a single cramped room above a boat repair shop that smelled faintly of salt and engine oil. It wasn't glamorous, but it was close, and close was what mattered after a night like the one they'd just survived. Kalen didn't notice his arm was bleeding until they were inside with the door locked behind them. "You're hurt." Aura grabbed his wrist before he could wave it off, turning his forearm toward the single overhead light. A long, shallow cut ran from his elbow to his wrist, dark red soaking through the torn sleeve of his jacket. "Security door," he said, "closed faster than I expected on the way out." "You didn't say anything." "Didn't have time to say anything. I was a little busy not getting caught." Aura shot him a look that wasn't quite amusement and wasn't quite worry, but sat somewhere honest between the two. "Sit down. There's a first aid kit under the sink. I saw it when we came in earlier." He didn't argue. That alone told her how tired he really was. Kalen Vance, who argued with boardrooms and armed men and his own family with equal ease, sat down on the edge of the narrow bed without a single word of protest and let her clean the cut on his arm like it was the most natural thing in the world. She worked in silence for a while, dabbing antiseptic along the wound with careful, practiced hands. "You've done this before," Kalen said, watching her. "Delivery work isn't gentle on the body. You learn to patch yourself up when you can't afford to see a doctor for every scrape." She wrapped a strip of gauze around his forearm, tying it off with a small, efficient knot. "There, you'll live." "High praise. Don't get used to it." He laughed, quiet and a little rough, like the sound had been buried under exhaustion and adrenaline for so long it had almost forgotten how to come out. Aura found herself smiling before she'd decided to, and for a moment neither of them said anything, the small room filled only with the distant creak of boats shifting against the docks outside. "Thank you," Kalen said eventually, his voice lower now. "Not just for the arm. For tonight. For all of it. I don't think I would have survived the last 4 days without you." "You'd have found another way." "Maybe. But I don't think I'd have wanted to." He looked at her steadily, something raw in his expression that she hadn't seen from him before, not the calculated calm of the boardroom, not the guarded suspicion of that first night in the loading bay. Just him. I've spent 6 years surrounded by people who either want something from me or are afraid of what I could do to them. You're the first person who's looked at me like neither of those things mattered. Aura felt her chest tighten, the adrenaline of the night settling into something quieter and far more dangerous. You barely know me. I know you crawled through a maintenance tunnel to save both our lives without hesitating. I know you rebuilt half your apartment out of scrap because you refused to let a lack of money stop you from doing what you loved. I know you've spent years taking care of everyone around you and somehow still have enough left over to patch up a stranger's arm at midnight. His voice dropped further. I know more than you think. That's not the same as knowing someone. No, he agreed, but it's a start. The space between them had shrunk without either of them fully deciding to close it, and Aura found herself very aware of how close his hand was to hers on the edge of the bed, how the low light caught the exhaustion and something softer in his eyes at the same time. This is a bad idea, she said quietly, though she made no move to put distance between them. Probably, Kalen agreed. You're my bosses. You're basically the head of a criminal empire I accidentally got dragged into. That's also true. I should go back to my own life the second this is over, whatever this is. She gestured vaguely between them, though her voice had lost most of its conviction. You should, Kalen said, but I don't particularly want you to. Aura looked up at him, and whatever careful walls she'd been holding up for 4 days, since the moment he'd cornered her in that loading bay with accusations and a tablet full of falsified logs, cracked just enough to let something else through. Kalen. He kissed her before she finished his name, gentle at first, like he was giving her every chance to pull away if she wanted to. She didn't. Her hand found the front of his shirt, steadying herself against him as the kiss deepened. 4 days of fear and adrenaline, and something neither of them had let themselves name, finally breaking loose all at once. When they finally broke apart, both of them slightly breathless, Kalen rested his forehead against hers, his uninjured hand cupping the side of her face like she was something fragile and important all at once. I wasn't planning on this, he admitted quietly. Neither was I. Aura let out a small, shaky laugh. I was expecting to get arrested tonight. This is a significant improvement. I'll take that as a compliment. You should. They sat together in the quiet marina apartment for a long while after that, the danger outside momentarily forgotten, the weight of everything still ahead of them, Vane, the auction, the 4-day deadline closing in faster than either of them wanted to admit, set aside just long enough to feel like 2 people instead of a fugitive delivery girl and a Mafia heir fighting for both their lives. But even as Kalen held her, some small, cautious part of his mind was already turning back toward the fight ahead. Vane had a 2-day head start on the auction, and tomorrow they would need to be ready to follow him all the way to Zurich. The private jet touched down outside Zurich just after noon, and by the time Aura stepped off it, she barely recognized herself in the reflection of the terminal glass. Kalen's people had provided her with a new identity overnight, Elena Marchetti, an independent security consultant with a fabricated resume polished enough to survive scrutiny, along with a wardrobe that felt more like armor than clothing. You look uncomfortable, Kalen said, adjusting his own cufflinks as their car wound through the narrow streets toward the expo venue. I look like someone I'm not, Aura said. There's a difference. You'll get used to it for one night. The venue was a converted industrial building on the outskirts of the city, all glass and steel, transformed for the evening into a private technology gala for invitation-only guests. Kalen's forged credentials placed him as a potential investor from a shell firm, his real identity buried under enough legal misdirection to survive a cursory background check. Aura, as his consultant, would have access to the same rooms without drawing the same scrutiny. Somewhere in this building, Aura murmured as they crossed the lobby beneath a chandelier that probably cost more than her entire apartment building. Vane's running a live demo of that master key to buyers who paid a fortune just to be in the room. Then we find the room. It took most of an hour of careful movement through the crowd, polite conversation with strangers who assumed Kalen was exactly who his credentials claimed, careful glances towards staff-only doors, before Aura's scanner, hidden inside a clutch bag disguised as an ordinary evening accessory, picked up the signal she'd been hunting for. "Third floor," she murmured, angling the screen so only Kalen could see it. "Server traffic spiking from a private suite. That's our demo." They took the stairs rather than the elevator, avoiding cameras where they could, until they reached a hallway sealed behind a discreet security checkpoint, manned by 2 guards in expensive suits that didn't quite disguise the earpieces or the bulges beneath their jackets. "We're not getting through that directly," Kalen said quietly. "We don't need to." Aura had already spotted the maintenance access panel tucked into an alcove near a service elevator, the kind of overlooked infrastructure only someone who'd spent years thinking about building systems from the inside out would ever notice. Every building this size has a secondary network line for climate control and security backup. If I can tap into it, I can piggyback a relay onto whatever internal system Vane's using for his demo. "How long?" "Give me the room, and I'll give you the auction." She worked fast, kneeling by the panel with a portable rig no bigger than a paperback book, cables running from her fingers into the building's hidden network architecture. Kalen stood watch, positioned casually near the elevator like a man simply waiting for a call, his eyes tracking every guard, every camera, every flicker of movement in the hallway. "I'm in," Aura whispered after several tense minutes. "I can see the suite's internal feed. Vane's got a private terminal set up, streaming encrypted footage to at least 6 separate connections. Buyers, probably watching remotely from wherever they didn't want to risk showing their faces in person." "Can you access the transaction data?" "Working on it." Her fingers moved fast across the rig's small interface, routing through layers of encryption Vane had clearly built himself, each one a small, arrogant signature of a man who believed nobody would ever get close enough to try. He's confident, sloppy confident. He didn't think anyone outside his circle would ever be standing in this hallway. The feed resolved slowly on her screen, grainy but legible. A private server room somewhere deeper in the building, Vane standing beside a terminal displaying the master key's encrypted signature, while a series of numbers scrolled beside it. Bids. Real time, climbing steadily as unseen buyers competed for a key that could unlock security systems worth more than most countries' national infrastructure. "He's not just selling the key," Aura breathed, watching the numbers climb. "He's selling access to everything it protects, every server, every vault, every secure system Vance Corporate has ever built for a client. This isn't corporate theft, Kalen. This is an arms sale." Kalen's expression went hard and still, the last flicker of doubt about what Vane had become finally burning away. "Copy everything, every transaction, every buyer signature, every bid. I want proof detailed enough that Sorella can't look away from it, even if Vane tries to spin this as some kind of authorized deal." "Already running." Aura's rig hummed quietly as it siphoned data from the feed in real time, her portable relay recording every transaction as it crossed the terminal. "This is going to take a few minutes. The encryption's heavier than I expected." "Take the time you need. I'll cover the hallway." She worked in silence after that, sweat beading at her temple, despite the building's cool air conditioning, watching numbers climb into figures that made her stomach twist. Somewhere in that server room, Rhys Vane stood auctioning off the security of an entire empire, utterly unaware that 2 floors above, the evidence of his betrayal was being copied, byte by byte, onto a drive small enough to fit inside a clutch bag. "Got it," Aura finally whispered, disconnecting the rig with careful, steady hands. "Full transaction log, every buyer, every bid, enough to bury him." Kalen exhaled, some of the tension easing from his shoulders for the first time since they'd landed. "Then it's time we let him know exactly how thoroughly he's already lost." Aura closed the panel, tucking the rig back into her bag as they moved back toward the main hallway, the noise of the gala below rising up to meet them, polite conversation and clinking glasses, utterly oblivious to the quiet war being fought 2 floors above their heads. He's going to figure out someone accessed that feed, Aura said. Buildings like this log everything, even hidden network taps. Let him figure it out, Kalen said, a dangerous calm settling over his features. By the time he does, it'll already be too late to matter. They didn't make it back to the main floor. The service elevator doors opened onto the third-floor hallway just as they turned the corner, and Rhys Vane stepped out of them like he'd been expecting exactly this moment, flanked by two of the security guards who had been posted at the checkpoint minutes earlier. "Kalen," Vane said pleasantly, as though they'd bumped into each other at a company picnic instead of a private arms auction on foreign soil. "I have to admit, I didn't expect you to be quite this resourceful, or quite this reckless." "Rhys." Kalen's voice was perfectly level, betraying nothing of the drive tucked inside Aura's bag. "Funny running into you here. I thought you were handling a security review back in the city." "I am handling a security review." Vane's smile didn't waver. "You'd be amazed how much clarity you get about a system's weaknesses once you're the one exploiting them instead of patching them." He gestured, and the guards moved to flank the hallway's only other exit, cutting off any pretense that this was a casual conversation. "Walk with me," Vane said. "Both of you. I'd rather not make a scene in front of paying guests." There wasn't much choice. They followed him into a private server room tucked behind the VIP suite. The same room Aura had been watching remotely minutes earlier, now empty, except for the humming terminal still displaying the tail end of the auction feed, bids frozen mid-climb. "You should have stayed in the metro," Vane said, once the door closed behind them, his pleasant mask finally slipping into something colder. "I gave you every opportunity to let this go quietly. The manifest logs, the timeline, the girl. All of it was clean enough to survive scrutiny if you'd simply trusted the system instead of chasing after her like some kind of misguided knight. You framed an innocent employee to cover a theft you'd been planning for months," Kalen said. "Did you think I'd just let that go?" "I thought you'd do what your father would have done," Vane said, something almost wounded flickering behind the calm. "Protect the company first. Ask questions later, quietly, through proper channels, not drag a delivery girl across 2 continents like she's suddenly your equal." His eyes flicked to Aura with open contempt. "She's a symptom of everything wrong with how you run things, Kalen. Sentiment over strategy." "She's the reason I know exactly what you've built here tonight," Kalen said. "An arms sale disguised as a data breach. You're not just stealing from the company, Rhys. You're selling access to every client system Vance Corporate has ever secured. Banks, government contracts, half the infrastructure this family's spent decades protecting." Vane didn't bother denying it. If anything, something almost proud settled into his expression. "The board's been too cautious for years, clinging to a legitimate front while sitting on assets worth exponentially more if we simply stopped pretending to have scruples about who buys them. Once this auction closes, I'll have more than enough leverage to force Sorella's hand. She'll back me. The board will back me. And you," his gaze cut back to Kalen, "will be remembered as the executive who let sentiment cost this family everything." "You're forgetting something," Aura said quietly. Vane's attention snapped to her, mildly annoyed that the delivery girl had spoken at all. "And what would that be?" "That I've been listening to your auction feed for the last 20 minutes. Aura's hand was already moving inside her bag, fingers finding the small relay rig she hadn't fully powered down. "And that Vance Corporate's private security infrastructure, the same infrastructure you've spent 11 years building, has a diagnostic backdoor for emergency board communication. One that pings directly to a secured private tablet. Sorella's tablet." Vane's confidence cracked for the first time. "That backdoor requires physical access to root-level hardware." "I had physical access 2 floors up for 20 minutes, Aura said, already connecting her rig to the terminal's exposed port before either guard could react. "And your own encryption made it easy. You built a system so elegant, nobody would ever suspect it could be turned against you. That's the problem with signatures, Mr. Vane. Once you know how to read them, they work both ways." "Stop her!" Vane's voice cracked, all pretense of calm gone. But it was already too late. The terminal screen flickered, the auction feed cutting away mid-transaction, replaced by a direct broadcast connection routing straight through the company's emergency protocol, a system built to alert the board the instant a catastrophic security failure occurred. And there was no failure more catastrophic than what was happening in this room right now. "This is being recorded and transmitted live," Aura said calmly, stepping back from the terminal as the small indicator light blinked steady red. "Every word you've said in the last 2 minutes, straight to Sorella Vance's private device." Vane lunged for the terminal, but Kalen moved first, stepping between him and the console with the flat, dangerous calm of a man who had spent 6 years learning exactly how much restraint he could afford to lose. "It's done, Reese," Kalen said quietly. "She has your confession, the buyer transactions, everything. There's no version of tonight where you walk back into that boardroom and convince anyone you are protecting this family." For a long moment, Vane stood frozen, staring at the blinking red light like it might somehow undo itself if he looked hard enough. Then, something in his expression shifted. Not defeat, not yet, but the first cold calculations of a man realizing he'd need an entirely different plan to survive the next hour. "You have no idea what you've just done," Vane said quietly, backing toward the door. "Sorella isn't the only one with a stake in this auction. There are buyers on that feed who do not take kindly to interrupted transactions." "Then I suggest," Kalen said, "you figure out how to explain that to them, because you're not leaving this building with that master key. Not tonight, not ever." Vane's gaze flicked once more to Aura, sharp, venomous, and utterly without the calm he'd walked in wearing, before he turned and disappeared through the door, shouting orders to his guards in a voice that had finally, completely, lost its composure. The alarm started less than 90 seconds after Vane vanished through the door. "He's locking down the building," Aura said, watching her scanner light up with a cascade of security alerts rippling through the venue's network. "Full facility lockdown. All exits, all elevators, all stairwells sealed." "He's trying to trap us here until his people can clean this up quietly," Kalen said, already moving toward the door. "Or until whoever's watching that ruined auction decides we're worth silencing before we can talk to anyone else." "There's more." Aura's face went pale as new data scrolled across her screen. "He's pushing an emergency freeze order through the company's financial systems. Your accounts, Kalen, corporate and personal both. He's trying to strip your authority before Sorella can act on what we just sent her." "Let him try. Sorella has the confession. That matters more than account access right now." Kalen pulled the door open, checking the hallway. Empty for the moment, though the distant sound of raised voices and hurried footsteps told them that wouldn't last. "We need to get out of this building before his security team decides we're a bigger threat than the buyers he just humiliated." "The main exits are sealed," Aura said, already moving beside him. "But every building this size has an emergency evacuation protocol that overrides standard lockdown fire code requirements. If I can trigger that instead of trying to fight the lockdown directly, the system should force every exit open at once." "Can you trigger it from here?" "I can trigger it from anywhere with access to the building's core network, which," she said, tapping the rig still connected to the terminal in Vane's abandoned server room, "I currently have." Her fingers moved fast, routing through the same back door she'd used to hijack the auction feed minutes earlier, searching for the fire safety override buried deep in the building's infrastructure. Kalen stood watch at the door, tension coiling through his shoulders as the sound of boots on marble grew louder somewhere below. "They're coming up," he said. "Whatever you're doing, do it faster." "Almost there." Aura's screen flickered, resistance pushing back against her access attempt. "He's fighting me! Someone's actively defending the override lock from another terminal." "Vane." "Probably." She gritted her teeth, fingers flying faster. "He built this system. He knows exactly how I'm trying to get in." "Then find a door he didn't think to guard." Aura's eyes narrowed at the screen, scanning through layers of the building's network architecture with the same instinct that had guided her through delivery routes and shortcuts for years. And then she found it. Not the fire override, but something smaller, older, buried in a maintenance subsystem long since forgotten by whoever had last updated the building's security. "Loading dock," she said. "There's a manual override on the freight elevator that isn't tied to the main lockdown system at all. It's an independent mechanical failsafe from before the building's security was digitized. Vane wouldn't have thought to guard it because it barely exists in the modern network." "Where does it lead?" "Down to a service corridor that connects to the parking structure, and from there," she checked the schematic, "a direct line to the helipad on the east wing roof. Corporate guests use it for quick departures." "You want to go up before we go down?" "I want to go where Vane isn't expecting us to go." They moved fast, cutting through a service stairwell Aura navigated from memory of the schematic alone, boots echoing against concrete as the building's alarms wailed steadily overhead. Twice they had to freeze in shadowed alcoves as security teams swept past, flashlights sweeping walls, radios crackling with Vane's voice giving orders that grew increasingly frantic. They reached the roof access door just as a fresh wave of confirmation alerts hit Aura's scanner. "Sorella's responded," she said, breathless, reading the message scrolling across her screen. "She's seen the confession. Full board emergency session called. She's already moving to freeze Vane's authority instead of yours." "That's good news for later," Kalen said, pushing through the roof access door. "Right now, I'd settle for surviving the next 5 minutes." The helipad stretched out under the night sky, wind whipping across the exposed roof, a single, sleek helicopter waiting with its rotors beginning to spin, one of Kalen's contingency arrangements, activated the moment his emergency protocol had triggered downstairs. They were halfway across the pad when Vane's voice cut through the wind behind them. "Did you really think it would be this easy?" He stood at the roof access door, 2 guards flanking him, his composure fully shattered now, replaced by something raw and furious. "I built this company's security from nothing. I am not going to lose it to a boardroom vote and a delivery girl with a hobby." "It's already over, Reese," Kalen shouted over the rotor noise. "Sorella has everything. The board will move on you within the hour." "The board moves on whoever controls the narrative first," Vane snapped, stepping forward. "And right now, I still control." "You control nothing," Aura cut in, her scanner blinking with a final confirmation. "I locked your financial freeze order out 5 minutes ago, using the same back door you used against your own security team. Your access is gone, Mr. Vane. All of it." For a moment, Vane looked like a man who had just watched every piece of a carefully constructed plan collapse in real time, which, Kalen realized, was exactly what had happened. "Get in," Kalen said to Aura, pulling the helicopter door open against the wind. They climbed aboard as Vane shouted something, lost entirely to the noise of the rotors, his guards hesitating at the edge of the pad, unwilling to close the distance while the aircraft powered up to full speed. The helicopter lifted off the roof just as security lights swept across the pad below, Zurich's skyline tilting away beneath them as they climbed into the dark. Aura sat back against the seat, breathing hard, the master key drive and the auction evidence secured safely in her bag, the weight of the last 7 days finally beginning to settle. "We did it," she said, half in disbelief. Kalen reached over and took her hand, exhaustion and relief written plainly across his face for the first time since the loading bay. "We did," he agreed. "Now we go home, and make sure it stays that way." The boardroom looked different in daylight, Aura thought, less like the cold marble battlefield she remembered from Kalen's stories, and more like an ordinary room where ordinary decisions got made. Except nothing about today was ordinary. Sorella Vance sat at the head of the long glass table, a tablet in front of her, displaying the full transaction log Aura had pulled from Vane's server room in Zurich, alongside the recorded confession that had ended everything. Reese Vane sat across from her, flanked by 2 members of the board's internal security team, his composure finally completely gone. 11 years, Sorella said quietly, her voice carrying the particular kind of anger that came from betrayal by someone you'd trusted like family. 11 years, Reese, and you were willing to sell this company's entire security infrastructure to the highest bidder because you thought Kalen was too soft to hold on to it. "I was protecting this family from his sentimentality," Vane said, some last stubborn defiance clinging to his voice even now. Everything I did was calculated, strategic. You framed an innocent employee for a theft you orchestrated, Sorella said, and you tried to sell infrastructure access to buyers who would have used it to cripple half the systems this company was built to protect. There is nothing strategic about that, Reese. That's just greed wearing a better suit. She didn't wait for a rebuttal. With a single gesture, she nodded to the security team, who moved to escort Vane from the room. He didn't fight it. There was nothing left to fight with. His shares were frozen before he reached the door, his authority stripped in the same motion, his name already being quietly erased from every syndicate record that had once carried it with respect. Effective immediately, Sorella said to the rest of the board. Reese Vane is banished from this syndicate, permanently. He will never hold position, authority, or ownership in any Vance corporate entity again. When the doors closed behind him, the room exhaled as one, the tension of the last 10 days finally breaking. Sorella turned her attention to Kaelin, and then, for the first time, to Aura, who had been standing quietly near the back of the room throughout the entire proceeding. Miss Bellamy, Sorella said, I owe you an apology. This company nearly destroyed your life to cover its own failure. That should never have happened. I appreciate that, Aura said carefully. But an apology doesn't clear a manifest log with my name on a 9-figure theft. No, Sorella agreed. It doesn't. Kaelin has already handled that. He had. Aura had watched him do it that morning, sitting beside her at her own kitchen table, submitting the corrected records personally to the board's legal division. Her name fully cleared, the manifest logs annotated with the true timeline, the theft formally attributed to Vane's confession, and nothing else. There would be no lingering suspicion, no whispered doubt following her through future employment. It was over, clean and complete, in a way she hadn't quite let herself believe was possible. There's more, Kaelin said, stepping beside her. Something I want to do publicly, in front of the board, so there's no confusion about where things stand going forward. He nodded to an assistant near the door, who brought forward a folder and set it on the table in front of Aura. Your family's medical debt, Kaelin said quietly. Paid in full, as of this morning. Aura's breath caught. She'd told him about her mother once, back at the coastal compound, in the quiet honesty of a night that felt like it belonged to a different lifetime already. She hadn't expected him to remember every detail. She certainly hadn't expected this. Kaelin, I can't. You can, he said gently. You've spent years carrying that weight alone, working a job beneath your talent just to keep your family afloat. That's over now. And there's something else. He nodded again, and the assistant pulled up a second document, a formal proposal, funding allocated, a project name Aura recognized instantly because she described it herself, in her own words, on a dark night by the ocean. Bellamy Community Network Initiative. Full funding for accessible internet infrastructure in underserved neighborhoods across the metro. You said you'd build it if you ever got the real chance, Kaelin said. This is the chance. Aura stared at the document, throat tight, unable to find words for a long moment. And, Kaelin added, effective today, Vance Corporate has a new position, Chief Infrastructure Officer. I can't think of anyone better qualified to hold it. Someone who understands these systems from the ground up, who's proven exactly how far she'll go to protect what matters. The board members around the table exchanged glances, but none of them argued. After everything they'd just watched unfold, none of them would have dared. Later that afternoon, away from the boardroom's polished glass and marble, Kaelin and Aura stood together at the site of the future community center, an empty lot in one of the neighborhoods she'd grown up delivering packages through. The kind of place most people in his position had never bothered to walk through on foot. This is really happening, Aura said, looking out at the space that would soon hold servers and routers and cables reaching into homes that had never had reliable connection before. It is. Kaelin took her hand, the same way he had in the helicopter over Zurich, except now there was no danger left to survive, no deadline closing in, nothing but the quiet certainty of two people who had found something worth building together. For what it's worth, I meant what I said in Zurich. We go home, and we make sure it stays that way. Aura leaned into him, watching the late afternoon sun stretch long shadows across the lot that would soon become something new, a foundation, quite literally, for everything neither of them had dared to imagine 10 days ago. Then let's build it, she said. All of it.